In my opinion, the GV70 is the most exciting new luxury vehicle for 2022, and this reminds me a great deal of the old Infiniti FX, because the FX was styled differently than the German options, but it really focused on performance, and that applies to the GV70 as well. This is quite different from the luxury options in this segment from Japan, like the NX, the RDX, or the QX50, because even though all-wheel drive is standard on the GV70, this is a rear-wheel drive based vehicle with a powerful twin-turbo engine under the hood. If you think that sounds a lot like a BMW X3 or Mercedes GLC or an Alfa Romeo Stelvio, then you're right. That's exactly what Genesis was going for when they designed the powertrain of this vehicle. But unlike most of the European options, Genesis goes in their own direction when it comes to styling inside and out, and that's another thing that I love about the GV70. What's impressed me most about Genesis over their very short lifetime is how rapidly the brand is evolving. When Genesis first launched about 6 years ago, their cars were frankly generic luxury cars when it came to styling, and now they definitely have a distinct style of their own. But unlike some of the German alternatives, Genesis decided not to style all of their vehicles like Russian nesting dolls. So we have the family grille here, but the shape is not exactly the same in every Genesis models. We have some distinctive touches like the quad LED headlights, but again, not the exact same modules or just scale versions of the module like we find in most of the European alternatives. As always, let me know what you think about the look of the GV70 down there in the comments section below. One nice touch that I appreciate is they've moved the radar sensor lower on the bumper rather than putting it right here in the middle of the big Superman grille like we see in some of the other Genesis models. As with most new cars, we don't need the entire grille for cooling, so you'll notice that only the center section is actually used for cooling. The rest of it is blanked off. But down here lower where we would normally find fog lights, we find functional vents. From the side, it's obvious that the GV70 rides on a rear-wheel drive platform. You can see how long this hood is right here. I can just barely reach the end of it. At 185.6 inches long, the GV70 is almost exactly the same length as the BMW X5. They're only separated by about 0.3 of an inch. The design of this is quite different than the Acura, the Lexus, or the Infiniti because we have that long hood profile and a really long wheelbase, much shorter overhang up front than we find especially in the RDX and the NX. This wheelbase is about 10 inches longer than the Lexus NX, even though the vehicle is really not that far off in terms of size. Now back here in the rear, they've opted for a definite different style than we find in the GV80. This kind of reminds me a little bit of perhaps a luxury jacked up hatchback. No luxury car would be complete without big brakes, big wheels, and big tires, so we find all three up here. These are 21-inch wheels, 255 width up front, and unlike some of the European competition, 255 width in the back as well. So these are symmetric tires. They can be rotated front to rear. Let me know what you think about the styling decision to give this more of a sloping rear end. This reminds me a little bit of the Macan right here in this area. Genesis continues the double stripe theme around the rear with the tail lamp modules that are full LEDs. The turn signals are red. We have standard dual exhaust on every model, but the dual exhausts do change. Here on the 3.5T, we get a little badge right there and slightly bigger exhausts in the rear. One thing worth noting, this crosshatch pattern down here in this area that extends all the way over to the side of the vehicle is definitely attractive, but it is a little difficult to clean. In case you're wondering, the backup lights are located right down there at the bottom of the bumper. And the button for the power hatch is thoughtfully placed right here with the rear windshield wiper. In North America, there are going to be two different engines offered in the GV70. The base engine is a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine producing 300 horsepower, or you can get this 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6 that bumps things up to 375 horsepower and a whopping 391 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to a standard 8-speed automatic transmission and standard all-wheel drive. Now, if you buy the GV70 outside of North America, you may be able to get your hands on an optional diesel engine and possibly a rear-wheel drive version at some point in the future. Going in for a closer look, you'll notice that Genesis has located this V6 engine pretty similarly to where Mercedes locates their engines in their chassis when they have a V6 engine. The front two cylinders are right about here, and that's basically on top of the front axle. Everything else is behind the front axle, giving this the excellent weight balance that you'd expect in a rear-wheel drive vehicle. Of course, we also have a transmission that can handle the power of a rear-wheel drive vehicle with a twin-turbo V6. And that's one of the reasons that I suspect the upcoming RDX Type S is not going to be nearly as fast as the GV70, or of course an X3 with their turbocharged 6-cylinder engine, or the Mercedes, etc. One of the reasons that Genesis went with rear-wheel drive platforms in all of their vehicles is that rear-wheel drive transmissions have better cooling ability, there's a little bit more room for them to exist, and dynamically you can put more power in a vehicle. And that's also the reason that all the front-wheel drive competition at the moment tops out at around 300 horsepower. And that's just where this starts. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'll explain why I find the evolution at Genesis so impressive. Let's take a look at a close parallel, Lexus. In 1989, they released their first two vehicles. Only one of them wasn't exactly new. It was the Lexus ES, a rebadged Camry. The LS was all new, as differentiated from the rest of the Toyota lineup as this Genesis is differentiated from the rest of the Hyundai lineup in North America. It took them 2 years to bring us an LS-based coupe, then 2 more years to bring us the Lexus GS sedan, then 2 more years to bring us a Land Cruiser rebadged as the Lexus LX. For those that are counting, that is 6 total years to bring us 3 unique models and then 2 Toyota models that had been refreshed or tweaked, I guess you'd say, to create Lexus models. Over here in the Genesis lineup, things are a bit different. Now the G80 and G90 did start out their lives as Hyundai models. That's the genesis of the Genesis brand, really, is the original Hyundai Genesis. But it wasn't until 2015 that parent company Hyundai decided to spin off Genesis as its own separate luxury brand. And in the intervening 6 years so far, we have 5 models that share nothing with any currently produced Hyundai vehicle. We have a new EV coming out next year and the promise of perhaps a 3-row crossover and even other crossovers or other EVs coming at some point in the future. But more than just the fact that Genesis is chasing the Germans when it comes to engineering and design, and in that same time frame they've produced more models, I'm also impressed by the fact that Genesis seems to evolve their models very rapidly. The G70 is relatively new, and they've given it a pretty significant refresh as well. We're expecting an all-new G90 coming up at some point soon, and of course, the brand's full EV. It's worth noting that's going to be several years before the first full EV that we're going to see from Lexus. Jumping inside, we find a very comfortable and very adjustable driver's seat in this top-end trim. The seat bottom cushion adjusts for height, it adjusts for tilt. We have a power-extending thigh cushion. The seat bottom cushion has an inflator module in it so that way you can raise it up and raise it down as well. 4-way adjustable lumbar support, inflatable bolsters, and an available massage functionality. For me, at least, this is one of the most comfortable seats available in this segment. We have a 4-way powered tilt telescopic steering column with the 2-position memory over there on the driver's door. But unfortunately, I do have one problem up here, and that is the fact that the front seat on the passenger side does not have the same range of motion as the driver. It's missing actually quite a bit. This seat doesn't have the memory, it doesn't have the massage, it doesn't have the extending thigh cushion or the inflatable bolsters, but we do get a 4-way adjustable lumbar support. Now the reason here, of course, is cost. Most people don't have a passenger in their vehicle all the time. However, in a luxury vehicle, I really love the options that do have a passenger seat with the same range of motion as the driver because it helps prevent complaints on those longer journeys with your spouse. Jumping into the back, we have 78.5 inches of combined legroom. That's among the best as far as rear-wheel drive options in this segment goes. It's worth noting that some of the front-wheel drive options will have more room because they have that shorter hood profile, same length on the outside, and that yields more interior practicality. I do have enough room here for me to sit right here behind myself with that front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I can also move over to the right side here. We definitely have a hump in the middle. This is a rear-wheel drive vehicle again. This front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I have about 1 inch of legroom left. So you could put a child seat in a rear-facing position back here behind, I would say, the average adult driver up front, but taller folks may find a little bit more room in some of those other options. Remembering that this is a compact crossover, the rear bench is definitely going to be narrower than the one that we find in the GV80, but headroom is still pretty generous back here. My hair is just barely brushing the ceiling. This has the optional large panoramic moonroof, and the rim of that moonroof is right there above my head. Genesis gives the rear passengers fairly wide footwell, so I didn't have any problem squeezing my feet in there. We have 3-zone automatic climate control, some charge-only ports down there, and in a very Genesis fashion, we have controls to move that front passenger seat forward from the rear seats that helps the rear passengers get a little bit more legroom. Behind the power hatch, we find 28.9 cubic feet of cargo capacity. That puts this ahead of all the other rear-wheel drive options in this segment, but you will find a little bit more cargo room in some of the front-wheel drive alternatives. Going in for a closer look, you'll notice that Genesis has really tried to maximize all the space going on here, but we do have that sloping rear profile. In a nice luxury touch, they've wrapped Alcantara all the way back here to the cargo area. That's one of the rear speakers there for the surround sound system. The rear seats can be folded via a lever on the rear seats themselves or a lever right back here in the cargo area. Under the load floor, we find a little bit of additional storage space and something of a unicorn for a rear-wheel drive model in this group, a spare tire. Let's go for a quick spin around the interior. Up here we have the controls for the telematics system, as well as this large panoramic moonroof. You can see it extends to just over the rear passengers' heads. In case you're wondering, yes, the sun visors do slide side to side. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. As with most luxury cars, imitation leather is standard, real leather is optional. This model has a combination of real leather and then faux suede sections right there in the middle. The center section of the seat bottom and back cushion is perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. We have a number of different interior color options. This one has the contrasting charcoal and red interior, lots of red going on the front doors. I really love the fact that Genesis has given us a bunch of different interior and exterior color options here. There are also a number of different trim options available. This one has carbon fiber on the front doors and on the center console. You can see all the red going on there on the front door. Let me know what you think about this. I have to say, I really like the color of this interior, as well as the fact that Genesis is giving us so many different ways you can get your Genesis. There are also a number of different trim options. This one has carbon fiber on the doors and on the center console. Let me know what you think about the red interior color. There's also a blue interior available, which I think is really unique. This interior is definitely styled differently than the rest of the Genesis lineup. Rather than having trim on the dashboard, we have trim inserts on either side of the center console. The rest of the dashboard is also styled quite differently to the other Genesis vehicles in the United States. We have a soft-touch injection molded upper section of the dashboard, stitched lower section of the dashboard, and then a soft-touch cover on the glove box. The glove compartment is a little on the small side. I was not able to squeeze a 10-inch tablet computer inside. In this model, the large strip that runs across the dashboard connecting one air vent to the other does not contain any air vents inside it. In the middle of the dash, we have the same large touchscreen infotainment system that we find in other Genesis vehicles, but this is actually placed a little bit further away from the driver, so some folks might find it a little bit tricky to actually touch the options right here on the screen. The Genesis interface is basically the same as the rest of the Genesis lineup, and you can use a controller knob in the center console to control the screen if you don't want to touch it. Below that screen, we have two large air vents, the engine start-stop button. This little bump over here is quite interesting. This is a fingerprint sensor, because if you want to, you can use your phone as a key and you can use your finger as a key to start the vehicle. We have an auto button right there for the climate control system. This is a 3-zone automatic climate control. Touch LCD right here in the middle for the heated and ventilated seats and some of the climate control functions, and then physical buttons across the bottom for some of those infotainment functions. Down here we have a drive mode toggle, button for the parking sensors, 360-degree camera system, controls for that infotainment system right here, that's this knob right here. In addition to rotating around, this is also a touch-sensitive top, so you can use your finger to scroll through options. Over here on this side, behind this little door, we have a Qi wireless charging mat, a USB input, USB charge-only port right there, and you can put some of those larger smartphones with the cable still attached under that door. Two decently sized cup holders over here. The shifter is the same rotary design that we find in other Genesis vehicles. It has a clear top. You can see the knurling right there through the clear top. It rotates around, drive right there, reverse there, park is that button, and then we have auto brake hold. Under the center armrest, we find a fairly small storage cubby. Remember, the transmission is basically under this section of the vehicle. There's a new full-color heads-up display on the driver's side, and interestingly enough, the same 3D LCD instrument cluster that we find in the more expensive Genesis models. Now, this one is not standard, an 8-inch color LCD is. This one is optional. The technology behind this display is interesting. These demon eyes right here are tracking your eyes and where you're looking at the display. So that way it can project the images back in a way that looks 3D regardless of exactly where your head is pointed. But you'll notice that the passenger in the vehicle, sometimes you'll see that it's a little bit fuzzy from the side because the 3D technology is not designed to be viewed from that angle. It's designed to be viewed by the driver right in front. The steering wheel is a new design for Genesis. One thing that I've noticed is that pretty much every Genesis vehicle has a unique steering wheel design. Paddle shifters on the back, sport grips up top. This looks a lot like the one in the G70, but it's not exactly the same. We have touch controls over here for the adaptive cruise control system that is standard, and then over here for the infotainment system. Thanks to the twin turbocharged engine, this vehicle takes off like a bat out of a mixed metaphor land. 0 to 60 happened in 4.8 seconds. That is awfully close to the C43, the BMW X3 M40i, the Volvo XC60 T8 plug-in hybrid, that's a mouthful, and of course the Audi SQ5. This is significantly faster than the fastest version of the Lexus NX, and even the upcoming plug-in hybrid Lexus NX, which is promising to be one of the fastest front-wheel drive-based Lexus models, that's going to be notably slower than this. And that's all thanks to the new 3.5-liter twin-turbo engine, the 8-speed automatic transmission that doesn't have to limit torque in any gear, and of course, the standard all-wheel drive system. Standard all-wheel drive is definitely going to be a big deal for a lot of folks out there. Bear in mind that the majority of the competitors in this segment will start out in two-wheel drive format, whether that's front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive, and all-wheel drive is standard even in the base model. Out on the road, the GV70 feels like what you would get if you tossed a BMW X3 and a Jaguar F-Pace into a blender and then added just a sprinkle of Mercedes-Benz GLC. And that's not a bad combination of ingredients. The transmission in this vehicle is a little bit slower to shift than the BMW X3, but this has the sense of urgency that we find in the BMW. Only 0.2 of a second separate the 0 to 60 time in this from the last X3 that I was able to test from a dealer. And in my 60 to 0 braking testing, it took just 110 feet for this vehicle to stop from 60 miles an hour. That is definitely BMW-like in terms of stopping distance. That's thanks to the big brake rotors we have up front. When it comes to the way the dynamics of the vehicle are tuned, this feels a little bit perhaps more like the Jaguar F-Pace. Genesis chose not to put staggered tires in this vehicle, so we don't have wider tires in the rear like we do find in some of the German options, and that changes the way the vehicle handles a little bit. This has a near-perfect 50-50 weight balance, again, near-perfect, not exactly, but that really is obvious when you start pushing this harder out on the road. We get a little bit of gentle understeer, but if you dig deeper into the throttle, you can get the rear end to step around just a little bit. And if I hit the custom mode settings here in the infotainment system, I can change the way the all-wheel drive system behaves. Eco is going to send more power to the rear axle unless slip is detected. Comfort is going to try and balance things out for decent handling that feels very predictable. Sport, that's going to try and send even more power to the rear, so that way you can really get that rear end to curve around in corners when you floor it. And that's not something you can do in the Lexus, the Acura, or the Infiniti. When it comes to handling, I am absolutely going to give this an A. I love the balance that Genesis has chosen for the GV70. This is not a hardcore sports model. This is not trying to be exactly a C43 AMG or a GLC 43 AMG. It's certainly not trying to be an X3M. Instead, what Genesis decided to do was give us perhaps a bit more of a balance between ride quality, performance, handling ability, and the luxury features as well. And in that respect, this reminds me a lot of modern Jaguars. The sort of blend between Germanic and English feel continues out on a rougher road surface like the one that I'm on here. This model has an adaptive suspension system, but they're just 2 settings, so a little less adjustability than we find in some of the competition. Right now it's in the most comfortable mode. If I put it over here to Sport Plus or Sport, then it's going to firm things up. But this is never going to be quite as firm as, say, the C43 AMG in its firmest setting. And that's why I'm going to give the ride quality, even in this sportiest version of the GV70, an A. Now, if you're looking for the most compliant ride available in a similar price range to the model that I'm driving here, that would be something like the Lexus RX. But the mission of that vehicle is quite different from the GV70's mission. When the road starts to bend, it's obvious that Genesis was really focusing on driving dynamics with the GV70. This is a ton of fun to drive. And this is one of the few all-wheel drive systems on the market right now that is definitely deliberately targeted at sporty driving. Like the BMW and the Mercedes all-wheel drive systems, when you push this a little bit harder in the corners, it will send more power to the rear axle to help you steer around the corner with your right foot. I also love the fact that this is the same all-wheel drive system and basically the same all-wheel drive system tuning that we find in the base engine version of the GV70. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit nimble and a little bit less expensive, definitely take a look at that model. In my cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, when the vehicle is of course in drive, I measured 71 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, making this one of the quieter entries in this group. This is definitely a little bit quieter than the last Lexus NX that I tested, but remember, we are going to get an all-new NX model very, very soon. That's thanks to things like acoustic laminated side windows. The one area where the GV70 lags the competition is fuel economy. Over a week of mixed driving, I've been averaging 21.2 mpg. Now that's right where the EPA says this vehicle should be, so it's definitely hitting its EPA target, but that's also several mpg less than most of the competition. It's going to give you relatively similar performance than this. You could go 0 to 60 just as fast or faster in the X3, or a Q5, or a GLC, or a Volvo XC60, and all of those will have MPG options that are much higher than this. You can get up to 27 MPG in some of those plug-in hybrid vehicles with relatively similar 0 to 60 performance. And of course, if you're not interested in a plug-in hybrid, there are still a few options out there that will get you similar performance or better performance than this, while also giving you a few MPG better. Is the fun factor and the reliability factor that we find in the GV70 enough to compensate for that lower fuel economy? Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Now that I'm out on the open highway, I should talk a little bit about the driver assistance tech in the GV70. This comes with almost the entire suite of Genesis active safety systems: adaptive cruise control, their aggressive lane centering system, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic detection, driver attention monitoring, etc. The 360-degree camera system that this vehicle has is optional, but the vast majority of the systems are standard. That's a little bit different than we find in a lot of the German alternatives, where they don't have that much active driver assistance tech standard. In addition to traditional lane keeping, this vehicle also has the highway driving assist system from Genesis. This is a really aggressive lane centering system that even around sharper corners will keep the vehicle centered. It also features their newest lane change assist feature, and you don't have to have cruise control active to have the assistance system active. So right now I'm on the open highway, I'm just tootling around these corners, the car is doing most of the effort here, and I do not have to have the cruise control active. I'm actually using the accelerator pedal, although I could definitely activate that system here. The so-called highway driving assist is certainly one of the most aggressive lane centering systems in the luxury segment. This is quite similar to the latest Mercedes system. Genesis has picked up a little bit of inspiration from Tesla, so the heads-up display and the LCD instrument cluster will both show the outlines of vehicles around you when the cruise control is active. I think the most interesting thing about the GV70 is how Genesis has decided to position the vehicle. They have neatly avoided the same kind of comparisons that we find with the brand new Lexus NX by making the GV70 unique. I've seen a lot of folks comment out there being really disappointed that the new NX shares basically every engine except for the 2.4-liter turbo with the RAV4, and that is not what we see in the Genesis product lineup, even though the displacement is the same on the base engine, 2.5 liters, as we find in some Hyundai and Kia products. It's actually a slightly different engine because it's rotated 90 degrees, and the vehicles are all rear-wheel drive biased, even though all-wheel drive is standard. And the pricing really reflects that. The Genesis is not a discount option necessarily in this segment, starting at $41,000. That is $3,000 more than the base Lexus NX, $3,500 more than the Acura RDX, $5,000 more than the Lincoln Corsair, and to be perfectly honest, the Genesis is worth it. If you've been interested in Genesis models because of their strong value proposition, don't worry, the value proposition is still there, because $41,000 is significantly less expensive than any of the European competition. The Volvo is going to be about $1,600 more expensive for the base XC60 in 2022. The BMW X3 is similarly going to be more expensive. It starts at $43,700, and the GLC at $43,200. Now, I'm really going to skip the Audi and the Volvo here because dynamically, the GV70 is more like the BMW and the Mercedes. The Audi has a good balance and it's a good value, but the engine sits entirely in front of the front axle. That's not the case in the GV70, and of course, the Volvo XC60 starts as a front-wheel drive vehicle. So let's just dive right into the comparisons with the BMW X3. This has long been one of the best-selling compact luxury crossovers in the US for good reason. It's well-balanced, it's well-priced, the fuel economy is good, it's roomy on the inside, and it's fun to drive. All of that really applies to the GV70, with the exception of the fuel economy component there. Now, pros for the X3, brand obviously, BMW has been around the luxury business longer, the brand logically for some people carries a little bit more cachet. Fuel economy is also better, especially when we're talking the base 2-liter turbo in the X3. Fuel economy is really quite good. I like the interior design of the X3, and I also like the level of customization that you can get in that model. There's also the X3M and of course the M340i versions of that. The 3-liter inline-6 is a beautiful engine in the BMW X3. Now on the downside, there's the price tag. It may seem like the price is only a few $1,000s apart at the beginning, but if you start comparably equipping your BMW, you're going to be thousands and thousands of dollars more expensive than the Genesis. And things will get more expensive the longer you own your BMW X3. It has a shorter warranty than the Genesis, higher cost of repairs after the warranty is over, and generally speaking, lower reliability as well. Reliability in the Genesis lineup has been extremely good. We'll have to see how the new engine family bears out, but we do have that long standard warranty, and historically, Genesis has been punching above their weight. They've really been pretty close to Lexus in reliability. A lot of these pros and cons apply to our next competitor, the Mercedes-Benz GLC. It's going to start at $43,200, so a little bit less than the BMW, but definitely more than the Genesis. And we get a rear-wheel drive vehicle. Now, that could be a pro and con to different people depending on how you look at it. If you want a rear-wheel drive luxury crossover for that rear-wheel drive dynamic, you won't find that in the Genesis. They're all-wheel drive standard, although it is a rear-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive system. On the other hand, if you want all-wheel drive, the Genesis is going to be considerably less expensive. The 9-speed automatic transmission does have nice gear ratios in the GLC, but I think the 8-speed automatic that we find in the Genesis is actually a little bit smoother. When it comes to interior design, I like both the GLC and the Genesis GV70 a bit more than the BMW X3, but you'll find more customization options available in the Mercedes. And that's one of the things to keep in mind with modern Mercedes, period, is there are a ton of different ways that you can configure your vehicle. Lots of leather choices, wood choices, interior style choices, lots of option packages to add, and a ton of standalone options. So if you get carried away with options, your GLC can get quite expensive, but it may not be like any other GLC you see out on the road. I like the design of the infotainment software and the instrument cluster on both of these vehicles, but the Mercedes offers more customization. There are more whiz-bang features available in the infotainment system. In the instrument cluster, it is definitely more configurable, even though it lacks the 3D ability that we find in the GV70. Now, on the downside, the Mercedes infotainment system is not exactly easy to use. The design is not intuitive. Some of the functions are a little bit clunky sometimes, but it does offer you a level of customization that we don't see in the Genesis system. If you're a gadget person, you're going to want the Mercedes system. If you just want something that's easy to use and works all the time, you're probably going to want the Genesis system. Bottom line, the GV70 is incredibly impressive. And what's most impressive about it is the competitive set that Genesis has chosen for themselves. They decided not to make a Lexus NX or an Acura RDX or an Infiniti Q50 or a Cadillac XT5 or XT4 or a Lincoln Corsair or even logically a Volvo XC60. Instead, they decided to take on the Germans directly, the BMW and the Mercedes, with a dedicated rear-wheel drive platform. A lot of folks were worried initially that Genesis would follow the Lexus mold when they started rolling out products. They launched with rear-wheel drive luxury sedans, but there was some worry that, like we see in the Lexus portfolio when they moved on to crossovers, that they would start pulling front-wheel drive platforms from Hyundai and start using those in the luxury segment. And that is absolutely not what Genesis has done. They've decided to dedicate themselves to rear-wheel drive driving dynamics and rear-wheel drive platforms. But at the same time, Genesis has also dedicated themselves to their long standard warranty, high reliability as well. Customer service has been a little bit iffy with Genesis. Some folks have been a bit disappointed by the Genesis dealer network, so you should keep that in mind. However, Genesis does have ways that you can avoid the dealer network if you don't want to. You can get the vehicles delivered to you, you can have them picked up and delivered for service. So if you don't want to experience a Genesis store inside or next to a Hyundai dealership, and you just want to go all in on just Genesis, you can do that from the comfort of your home. Be sure and let me know what you think about the GV70 down there in the comments section below. Genesis has really been moving quickly. We're going to be seeing some more crossover models from them soon, and a new full electric small crossover coming soon as well. Hopefully, I'll be able to drive that in calendar year 2022. In the meantime, be sure and head over to the merch store at awaymerch.com. You can buy shirts right like this one. Head over to facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.